Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to the BlockCrunch podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto. And before we get started, just a reminder for you guys out there, the BlockCrunch podcast is intended for informational purposes only. Neither the host nor its guests are licensed financial advisors, and nothing discussed should be construed as financial advice. Views held by BlockCrunch's guests are their own, and sponsorship messages do not constitute financial advice or endorsement. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. Today's episode of the BlockCrunch podcast is brought to you by Protocol Labs, the team behind Filecoin. So to tell us a little bit more is Colin Efren, who leads ecosystem at Protocol Labs. So Colin, can you tell us what's one thing that people misunderstand about Filecoin the most?
One thing people don't realize is that the launch of smart contracts on Filecoin in Q1 of this year will transform the Filecoin network into the world's largest open data economy and a full-fledged layer one within Web3. Most people think of Filecoin as the world's largest decentralized storage network. And while that's true, the community onboarded 450 petabytes of real data in 2022, up 18 times from the beginning of last year. Q1 of this year is transformational. The community is launching the Filecoin virtual machine where users can start writing programs to automate storage and renewal of data, pay for computation, and trigger retrievals. All of which is built on a permissionless market of hardware providers that is 15 exabytes in size. This will open the world's largest data economy and make Filecoin one of the most powerful layer one blockchains in Web3.
Hello there. Now, before we move on, I'd love to thank the hundreds of you who have subscribed to BlockCrunch VIP, because with your support, I've been able to share my real thoughts on specific projects that I don't usually share on interviews in a format that I enjoy more, which is bi-weekly written posts. We've also been able to offer exclusive AMAs, sharing my investment frameworks, interactable models, and breaking down important trends before they become big. Now, we even had Elon Musk comment on one of our threads recently. So if you haven't already, head on over to theblockcrunch.com/VIP, and you can access dozens of hours of research for what you'd spend on a coffee a day. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. Now, through the past years, I've had a complicated relationship with DAOs. Now, on one hand, I'm really compelled by the idea of decentrally organizing masses. And at the same time, I've seen the bureaucracy of many large DAOs up front, which made me appreciate why a lot of companies are run centrally versus decentrally. And over the past years, I've invested and worked closely with DAO tooling companies and saw firsthand how difficult it is to generate sustainable revenues from DAOs as such an experimental space. So over time, this kind of led to the conclusion that investing in DAOs is actually a very broad term, but at the same time, a very specific endeavor. And that perhaps the best people to do this are the people who also operate a DAO and invest in DAOs at the same time, which is what led me to this week's guest, which is Seed Club Ventures. Now, Seed Club is the leading network today for DAO builders and operators, and operates as a venture DAO itself of over 90 people in the Telegram group currently. Now, invested in their fund early last year, and this is actually the first time that we've officially caught up since then on a call format. So you guys are the first people to hear about the important lessons, the wins, the losses, the outlooks for some of the best DAO-focused investors out there. So Timour and Anthony, really grateful for you guys to come on the show. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much for having us, for sure.
Definitely. Now, before we get started, I want to just kick it off by a casual kind of icebreaker. What is your favorite DAO today? And I know it's hard to pick a favorite, but I'm just curious.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, go for it.
So it's tough, and it's kind of like choosing your favorite child in some ways, I guess, but I have to shill something from our portfolio, which is Cabin DAO. Cabin DAO are building a network city, which is essentially a collection of properties around the world tied with a shared culture, community, economy, governance system. And the properties are what they call neighborhoods, which are all independently owned and operated. And residents can come and live for as long as they want. They share amenities, etc. What I love about it is that they've started to gamify the process. So you can actually pick a role within this ecosystem. And I can't remember all 6 roles. I'm going to butcher some of them, but it's essentially like, caretaker, builder, naturalist, resident, Creator, I believe, is one. And it's literally like picking a class in a RPG game, and this becomes the experience that you have and the value that you provide to the ecosystem. So I think there are just really interesting elements in there, and I love how they're experimenting. Super, super smart folks on that team.
And this is all physical, right? This is not like in the metaverse or something.
This is very much, physical properties.
Got it. That's amazing. I don't think I've come across them yet. But curious, Anthony, what about you? What's your favorite DAO?
Yeah, I will say I also love Cabin, and I'll also show another project from our portfolio, which is Squiggle DAO. Now, obviously, my real favorite DAO will be Seed Club itself and Seed Club Ventures. But beyond that, obviously, Squiggle DAO, it's one of the first DAOs I was ever a contributor at. And the thing I love about it is the simplicity with which they have a clear vision and a clean kind of like meme alignment, which is something that we can kind of get onto this and later in the podcast. But like, what are we looking when we're investing into DAOs? And Squiggle DAO have an extremely clean and clear vision and mission around which their community are aligning, which is essentially to proliferate the culture and the meme of the Chromie Squiggle, which, if you don't know, is kind of an NFT generative art piece, which came out of the early stages of the Art Blocks ecosystem. So the members of Squiggle DAO are incredibly tightly united around this kind of shared passion for that specific piece of art. And I think, they are essentially collectively deciding on decisions around how to do so effectively. And that simplicity is something we love about, many of the DAOs that we are invested in addition to Cabin, which Timour mentioned. So, they have this vision of creating this network of decentralized cities, and everyone in that network knows that, and they are kind of collectively rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how different those two DAOs are. And it's so humbling to invest in DAOs because, when I first started investing, it was a lot of DeFi stuff and it's pretty homogenous. But for DAOs, you have things that relate to like physical real estate and then things that relate to a digital squiggle online, which is just crazy to me. And that leads me to my next question, which is, how did you guys decide that, hey, this is something we're going to dedicate our current efforts to and, start something like Seed Club?
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that point, by the way, which is I think that an interesting aspect of DAOs is that they really are a new base layer of organization and of human coordination, meaning there will be as many use cases for DAOs as there are for current organizations. And in fact, probably new, novel, emergent ones that we really can't even imagine now. And I think that this idea of DAOs as the next step of evolution in human coordination and organization is what really drew me into the space. And we can touch on kind of some of the actual use cases and how we think about investing into that, but just wanted to kind of mention that up front.
Yeah, to elaborate on what Timour mentioned from a personal perspective, I was aware of crypto since like 2012, 2013, but never really got involved with the industry until about 2020, which is when I discovered this intersection of DAOs, community tokens, social tokens, and NFTs. And that triggered like various parts of my brain, which were like kind of thinking, and then it put the kind of label to these mental models that I'd been building over time. Previously, I was working in an activist hedge fund, went into investment banking, just started doing a lot of entrepreneurial things online, and had previously been very into gaming as well. Was into music, had a music production company. So the thing about DAOs that kind of connected all of this was firstly future of work. I was also ran like a strategy consulting business, which was completely remote. So the element of DAOs that excited me was this kind of global, remote, async, like freelance 2.0 ownership economy, pseudo-anonymous, like super transparent kind of organizations. The other thing was this kind of decentralized ownership and governance idea, which is, incentive alignment, the equitable distribution of value, equality of opportunity, and just the notion that, as users, you could potentially participate in the governance and the ownership of the actual platforms and the products you're using as well. And then finally, like Timour mentioned, the eventual unlock, which my kind of TradFi brain got super excited about, was, we were living in this world of LLCs. And if I wanted to do something online, I had to go and create like a corp, and then, would I be a US one? Would I be a UK one? Would I be something else? How do I get my partners involved? How is the equity shared? Like, how do we administrate this thing? Whereas, firstly, DAOs were extremely easy to set up. They can be focused on various different things. They can be extremely malleable, and you can very clearly, effectively delegate the authority within that DAO. You can have a very clear kind of vision and value alignment, and there can also be mean alignment. So I started getting a bit theoretical and thinking like, okay, can we make like everything a DAO? Universities a DAO, charities a DAO, hedge funds a DAO, startups a DAO. And then I was thinking, well, if DAOs are a technological breakthrough and a genuine and meaningful improvement on the kind of preceding, let's just say, tech stack, then will that unlock just entirely new types of organizations and new ways of doing things? And when you combine that with kind of, new ways of digital ownership represented by NFTs, like how much more of a, 10x, 100x improvement on everything that we're doing is this? And I know I've gone on for a little bit too long, but I'm going to tie the loop and say, okay, like why C Club, why C Club Ventures? Well, C Club had positioned itself as, this accelerator for DAOs. And from a personal perspective, I was like one of the first people full time at C Club. And I saw it as an opportunity to just have as much of a broad exposure to this space as quickly as possible. And similarly at C Club Ventures, when we started investing, we were thinking about, okay, well, C Club is obviously this accelerator for DAOs and capturing a lot of the upside from specifically the DAOs, the DAOs themselves. But C Club Ventures offers us an opportunity to participate in the actual DAO infrastructure that's being built to facilitate this new kind of way of working.
Yeah, and I love that you guys as investors in DAOs also dog food the idea of DAOs, because you talk to a lot of investors, they're like, oh, I'm interested in DAOs, and you ask them what their favorite product is, and it's like Coinbase or something. So it's really cool that you guys are deep in the weeds with this. And just to give our audience a little sense of where you guys are right now, how big is C Club Ventures in terms of headcount or DAO participants? What is the check size that you guys write typically?
So we actually are slightly unique with the way that DAO is structured. I'll kind of try and TLDR it, but basically we're not, there's no way for a new member to join at the moment. Well, there is technically, but like we haven't onboarded any new members since our initial onboarding period. So we have 63 members who are collectively in a Telegram chat. One of them is yourself, Jason, and we collectively review opportunities. We discuss opportunities, we source deals, we vote on these deals, we perform due diligence, and then we finally make the investment, and then obviously support the portfolio going forward. We've raised $25 million at the get-go, and the average check size is about 250K. So as you can imagine, it's extremely early stage investment, so pre-seed, and I wouldn't even go as far as say seed, like really heavily focused on pre-seed investments.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the structure is interesting because when you think about the process of investing in early stage, and running a venture capital organization, there really are kind of three main buckets of things that we want to be focused on, right? We want to be sourcing the best possible deals. We want to be running due diligence, evaluating them and making the investments, and then supporting the portfolio. And what we've found is that the first and the third are areas where this structure really shines, right? We have a diverse set of opinions. We have a diverse set of members who can help us with that top of the funnel sourcing process, find interesting deals that either they're looking at investing in, or maybe they see as being a better fit for us than for their funds or their angel processes. And then helping the portfolio. So any investment that we make, that founder instantly gets access to a wide variety of experts and folks with just a lot of experience in the space. The diligence process in the middle is something that we have found thus far works really well with our core team in the middle. And I think that's worth touching on because we do have a core team, Anthony, myself, and Nima, who are kind of, keeping the train on the tracks, making sure everything keeps going, keeping folks engaged, letting folks know how they can best support. So we have this system that I think really gives us the best of all worlds, right? We have a diverse set of opinions, a lot of folks involved, but we still have a core team in the middle that can keep things running efficiently. And one aspect that Anthony didn't touch on, but I think is really cool as well, our structure allows for the creation of sub DAOs, which are essentially smaller, more efficient subgroups of members who can focus on a particular vertical that they are experts in, or a particular thing that we want to be doing. And we can go into some of those examples, but that's kind of the way that we've structured ourselves.
That is really interesting because it's quite similar to how we're structured. So my Angel Collective, Tangent, we're basically, myself, my partner, we run it full time, and then we have a bunch of mentors who co-invest with us. But there's always, two people who are doing this full time, who are kind of the herders and pushing things along. And it really does seem like even outside of Seed Club, like for all the DAOs out there, there's always like a core group of contributors that need to be driving things through. You really can't just rely on 60 or 90 people to all contribute, equally. I'm curious, was that something that you guys knew from day one that, hey, we need this core team, or was that like a lesson that you guys learned over time?
We went into it very intentionally. So having seen other venture DAOs, many of them were kind of like a bunch of people got a bunch of ETH together and put it into a wallet, and then it was like, let's go. And that kind of quite quickly resulted in the free rider problem, the tragedy of the commons, like coordination without structure, and just generally like inefficient operations and potentially like disastrous governance mechanisms. So we wanted to overcome that by saying, okay, we're going to have a very small, tight core team that are doing this full time. And we're going to ensure that each step of the venture process, sourcing, due diligencing, investing, and then support portfolio, we will lead that, but we will, where possible, kind of draw from the network and the group of the DAO in order to ensure kind of, let's just say, our hive mind is most effectively used. And I'm sure you can empathize with that, Tangent, as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Tangent is such a small group of people, so I really have a lot of respect for the fact that you guys can manage such a large group of people and keep everyone engaged throughout the past year. Just seeing everyone engaging every day on the Telegram chat, that's really quite something. And I'd love to move on to the thesis part of Seed Club, and I'm not gonna give you the old what is a DAO type of question. I'm more curious about what is the lay of the land right now on DAOs. Like, what are the biggest DAOs out there, and what are some of the up and coming categories that people might not be paying attention to?
Can I? I'll add a little preface, which is that I think the word DAO is experiencing some semantic drift, meaning it's starting to lose some meaning because everyone has a different definition, everyone uses it in different contexts. There obviously, I think, like you alluded to early on with the kind of traditional definition of a DAO, where automation in the middle, humans at the edges, a lot of the initial attempts and I think successful use cases have been in DeFi and have been protocol DAOs, right? So things like Yearn, things like Uniswap, etc. And those are incredible. And I think, Jason, I think a lot more actually about that side of the space. I think when we think about DAOs, we really think about internet native organizations with shared governance, ownership, and economic ties, right? Which is a little bit of a looser definition in terms of the automation part, but they're communities that are working towards those goals through the processes of progressive autonomization and progressive decentralization. So it's things like communities like Cabin, right, that are that have several autonomous and decentralized processes like decision making, etc. But they're really forging forward towards this goal of building this network city and then have a centralized team in the middle. Yeah, just wanted to kind of lay that context, and curious if you have any thoughts there, Anthony.
Yeah, I suppose it's worth just saying like what are DAOs getting right at the moment, because the lay of the land, it's a bit messy. We're in a bear market. Like even things that were previously working have now stopped working, and that's evidence of the fact that there was inherently something wrong previously. So what are DAOs getting right at the moment? And I can kind of go through a few of these points to give examples of DAOs that are getting that specific thing right. I would say one thing that we're very interested in is how DAOs are novel ways to generate revenue online. So two examples that come to mind are ENS DAO and Nouns DAO, both of whom have demonstrated kind of novel models to consistently generate revenues and sustainably grow their treasuries. Relatedly, but slightly separately, is capital formation. So we've seen everything from one-off to one-off and like kind of ephemeral use cases for DAOs to form capital. For example, Constitution DAO, which raised $47 million, I think, over the weekend to try and buy the US Constitution. But like there are more activist use cases like Ukraine DAO. I think they raised like $10 million to try and support the Ukraine war, or more kind of ongoing ecosystem developments and ecosystems such as Seeker Ventures or BitDAO, or kind of other organizations that have formed capital very quickly, efficiently around kind of a specific vision. There's also the
social
general
DAOs, service DAOs.
That's what I was going to say. Like kind of community building is something else that we've seen has worked very, very effectively within the kind of DAO realm, which is, you know, projects like Kraus House, which is a project that came through the CCOV Accelerator. Their vision was to buy and operate an NBA basketball team, and they got around a community of fanatics who are obsessed with, you know, basketball. They want to run a basketball team. They would never be able to do this independently. Kind of like buying a basketball team costs however many $1 billion. But as a DAO, they're kind of stronger together, and they've built a community around it. They're in the Discord every day, like going berserk around whatever ideas are going on. Proof Collective, FWB, these organizations have all leveraged on-chain and off-chain and online and offline methods to build a community around. So content, media, events, conferences, education, resources, and they've built hyper-engaged communities. So those are a few examples that we've seen, I think, DAOs do very well, and we would be very kind of interested in following up on all of these trends and seeing them proliferate.
And for the audiences who are not familiar, what is FWB? Is that a DAO where you go find like friends with benefits?
FWB is really a social community, I would say, at the fore, and it's essentially a collection of folks. There is some light, not to say gatekeeping, but there is an application process, and they review your application, and once you are admitted, you buy a certain number of tokens. I believe it's 70, and that gives you access to the community. So you're essentially paying to be in a community of folks, all of whom I've found to be really thoughtful and interesting and just generally cool people. And they have developed over time to become more of a cultural force, right? So they do events, they do content drops, they have an amazing newsletter that is really quite compelling. And it's just an example of a community that is co-creating something. You know, it's co-creating a vibe for the members. It's also co-creating content and, IRL activations. And everyone that's part of it is also an owner and has governance power within it. So I think it's a very kind of probably the first social DAO to really find product market fit at some sort of scale. And it's a very, very cool experiment.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you use the term product market fit, because it's so different from the typical like SaaS startup where you're used to, as a Web2 VC might be used to funding. And these DAOs are, they seem more like experiments almost. So I guess in terms of, looking at these DAOs as investments, how do you decide that, hey, this social club is going to be worth more than this social club, especially when there's no, a conventional business plan or like go-to-market plan?
Yeah, I think candidly, we're still at the stage where we're thinking more about, when we think about how to invest in this new paradigm, we're thinking more about how to invest in some of the picks and shovels or the structural layer that will allow for these types of things to grow, right? So we definitely have DAO investments. We have Refraction DAO, Cabin DAO, and a few others. But we're also thinking about some of the companies that will actually enable this new type of organization, this new type of work. So companies like Coordinate, Govern, Clarity, Joke DAO, Hats Protocol. These are some of our recent investments. So that's how we see in the investing side of that. One thing I wanted to touch on that I think is a very interesting point that you just kind of teed up for me, Jason. So I'm just gonna talk about it for a second. This space is very much in experimentation mode, and I think this is interesting because there's an author that I love called Matt Ridley who talks a lot about innovation and where ideas come from. And his central thesis point is that innovation comes from evolution, right? And evolution is essentially just a series of trial and error, right? Try something new, see if it works. If it does, keep going, etc. So if you imagine the perfect environment for innovation and therefore evolution, you would think of a environment where ideas can be shared quickly, things can be tried, new entities can be spawned in a minute, and capital can flow. If someone does something interesting over there, you can take that idea and try it in your own DAO or project. And so essentially I think I'm describing DAOs and kind of the crypto space more broadly. I think this is what people mean when they say DAOs and crypto are speedrunning experiments in economics and governance, because it's just happening so fast, like you can literally fork code and bring it into your project instantly, and suddenly you have a brand new addition to your product, or this new thing that your community can do, And that's why I think we're so excited about this world and why we're kind of investing meaningful capital into it.
Yeah, and I want to double click on something that I think Anthony mentioned just now, which is this idea of turning everything into DAOs. Because from my perspective, there are a lot of DAOs that manage single projects that make a lot of sense. But then in a lot of other use cases, as Anthony mentioned just now, it's usually the initialization stage where you see the most benefit of using a DAO, because you can quickly spin one up and quickly raise money. But besides the ideological stance, are there commercial benefits to running, say, a typical conventional enterprise in the form of a DAO?
So a couple of things. I'll say first that I actually think, so in this first generation of DAOs, right, that's been happening over the last few years, they've been things that are taking a decentralized and somewhat automated approach to achieving objectives that I think traditional firms also have wanted to achieve, right? So let's build a lending service, a lending platform, but make it decentralized, which is amazing. It's such an innovation. Or let's make a marketing agency like Vector DAO, but make it decentralized, which I think can itself be a 10x improvement. But what I think will be interesting is to see the net new use cases that will emerge out of this kind of primordial goo of innovation and experimentation, right? And we're starting to see glimpses of that, like Constitution DAO that Anthony mentioned, or Nouns, right? Nouns is just a really interesting experiment with a community whose sole purpose is the propagation of a meme and the spreading of an idea. And I think that's just net new, right? There have been brands obviously in the past that tried to build themselves, but to have this financial engine behind the spreading of this idea is very, very interesting and new. So what I would say is that I think there are definitely examples where running something like a DAO has financial benefit in the traditional sense that we think about it right now. But I think there are going to be, 5-10 years from now, we're going to look back and just be like, wow, okay, that was completely emergent. We absolutely could not have predicted this brand new thing, this brand new way of looking at what an organization can do. Anthony, would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I'll also add that one of the things that excited me about DAOs originally was this expansion of Packy McCormick's thesis around the great online game. And it struck a chord with me because I used to be a gamer, and just playing MMORPGs, you're buying assets, you're wearing them, you're fighting, you're shooting your bullets, you're wearing different clothes. And oftentimes there'll be ways to just spin up a group or a clan or a squad or, whatever other acronym you want to use associated with that. And I found this idea of a DAO being so powerful because you can come together and you can do new things that you previously weren't able to do as quickly and effectively as you could. And specifically with the intersection of NFTs, if us three want to create a DAO right now, we can go on one of our portfolio project's Prism, and we can go and put some money together. We can buy some digital assets, clothes, wallets, whatever. And I think this like notion of group ownership, group governance is something which, as more and more assets in the real and digital world go on chain, DAOs will facilitate new ways of collaborating, of entertaining, of working, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting as well. And before we kind of double click on that point, I want to make sure that our audience is following what is Nouns DAO, because you guys have mentioned that a few times now. I know what it is, but I want to make sure our listeners are following along as well.
It's a good question. I can have a go at describing it. There are folks who talk very eloquently about nouns, and I highly recommend checking out, I think, the C Club podcast with Jacob from Zora. Talks a lot about the project, but it's essentially it started as an NFT project that releases one NFT per day for the rest of time. Folks can bid on the NFT in a traditional auction, and then the money that's raised through that process goes into a shared treasury. And if you win a noun, you essentially have access to that treasury. And the cool kind of innovation here is that they are now able to spend that treasury on the goal of spreading the meme of nouns, right? Which is both the concept of it, but then also this imagery of square glasses, which are used on some of the characters. And what's cool is that, anything that spreads the meme will accrue value to the original canonical characters and the original NFTs. So the NFT holders can decide to send these square glasses into space and spend however many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that took of their own money, right? Because they know that if this project gets more attention, then again, more value will accrue to the NFTs that they hold. Or they can, fork the project and have someone make a movie about it, and someone can take the IP of nouns, make an animated cartoon with it, and not pay them anything, right? Or even get paid to do that from the treasury, and it will still drive value back to the original collection. So it's just, there's a lot of really interesting aspects of there in terms of governance, the power of canonical individual assets on chain in the form of NFTs. And I think for that reason, it's kind of captured a lot of attention as a project in the space.
And I mean this in the most referential and endearing way, but the art people always have the wackiest idea. It's just so crazy to me to send a pair of glasses into space, and somehow we managed to create a meme around that. It's insane.
I love it. I really, really love it. And you're right? And that's kind of the beautiful thing about NFTs and why it's so cool that art was in many ways the first killer use case of crypto and culture intersecting, because it attracts the people that are willing to try the craziest stuff, right? Artists. And yeah, so just a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, and I guess as a follow-up to Anthony's previous point, do you guys think there are any things that maybe should never be a DAO? Like, are there types of businesses or entities or endeavors that should just never be decentrally managed?
I mean, yeah, maybe we don't need nuclear launch codes being managed by huge communities. And obviously there are things, right? But I think this again touches on the aspect of what is a DAO, right? Vitalik has a great post on this, which I think is something like DAOs are not organizations or something. And he talks about how in decision-making environments that are convex, meaning if you have two choices and choosing either A or B leads to a better outcome than choosing something in the middle, then you don't want a DAO, right? So something that requires strong conviction and strong decision-making power, you need something that's centralized. Whereas in concave decision-making environments, which are decisions where choosing something in the middle actually leads to a better outcome, or choosing multiple options leads to a better outcome, that is something that's very well suited for a DAO. And I think what we'll see in the future are these kind of quasi organizations that are potentially part centralized at the top, and then have a decentralized model where there are pods of people doing work. So for example, Ukraine DAO, which I was a part of early on, was structured in this way, right? There was a central pod that was leading the kind of the thesis and the goal and the mission and the values and what are we actually doing here? And then the work was split between different pods of folks that were focused on different aspects of the organization.
Yeah, the name of that Vitalik piece is called DAOs are not corporations, and it basically encourages people to draw the delineation between these two and not have a direct comparison of what a DAO should be relative to what we are already familiar with. I just wanted to add this. This is basically what we're embracing at Seeker Ventures, which is to say, in investing, it's oftentimes the contrarian bets, the ones that people don't entirely agree with, the thing that, you need to believe the thing that no one else believes so you can really have 100x impact on the world. And in venture, especially in pre-seed investments, those are the types of founders that we really want to be backing. And if our venture DAO of 63 people, if 99% of them think that this founder is berserk, that might actually be a positive sign considering the track record of venture investing. So like, Timour's point was if you have a bunch of people and they all hold very different opinions on the spectrum, then some instances might make sense, which is where a DAO comes in to say we should probably make a compromise and like strike a balance between all of these opinions. And oftentimes there are situations where you want decisions to be made at the edges. And like, I don't necessarily think that DAOs are not the right structure to facilitate that. It's just as a DAO leader, you need to be conscious of, what is the purpose of your DAO and what type of tools and what type of governance models do you actually want to use with that in mind. And that's possibly, where we're seeing a lot of experimentation happen at the moment within DAOs, and where a lot of the trouble is being, had within some of these kind of larger DAO, I don't want to say catastrophes, but some of the frictions that are happening within DAOs is that they are using the wrong governance models to facilitate the decisions that that particular organization needs to think about.
And I guess speaking of successful DAOs or kind of contrarian bets, obviously it's still early days, but I'm curious, like, what is, like, let's say one promising or successful bet, or maybe one bet you guys made that each of you are excited about, and curious why you made those bets at the time.
Yeah, I'll mention one, and it's not necessarily a DAO, but it's an investment highly related to DAOs, which is Prism. Prism is essentially a collective ownership protocol. It makes it very easy for anyone to spin up a DAO and start collectively investing. It's highly related to the notion of Seeker Ventures, which is to say, we saw this opportunity for people to come together and allocate capital together, and that started in crypto with some people putting some money into a Gnosis or putting some money together in a wallet and then buying something together, and it kind of has proliferated up the capital allocation ladder, let's say, to go from people putting some money together and buying an NFT to people putting together some money and angel investing and putting some money together and doing pre-seed investing, which is what we're doing at Seeker Ventures. And I think one of the broader issues, not only in DAOs but in crypto generally, is UX. And Prism kind of have a fantastic team of designers, product builders, and they make it extremely easy and kind of automate a lot of the, let's say, the cap table, the expense management, all these kind of things that you would really want to have as a group, just buying and owning and lending and using assets. And I think that is just going to bring a ton of kind of consumer interest into the space.
Yeah, Timour, what about you?
An investment I'm really excited about from our portfolio is Stability AI, which is, again, also not a DAO, but when we first started talking to them back when they were kind of first developing the initial idea was to create a information tool using AI for DAOs and decentralized organizations. And we ended up investing in the pre-seed there and working with them. And it has now become, it pivoted fairly meaningfully into the kind of open source AI space and has now become one of the main entities behind Stable Diffusion, which is an open source text to image model, but has maintained a lot of the Web3 and crypto principles that initially drew us to work with the founding team, right? So they really are kind of at the forefront of this open source AI movement. And I think there are a lot of areas in which DAO ideas kind of intersect with what's happening there.
That is so interesting to me because I never thought that DAO tooling could pivot into AI. And is that like a broader trend that you're seeing, or was that like an outlier example?
Well, there is definitely a broader trend of this intersection between DAO and DAOs, and again, like DAO principles, Web3 concepts and tools, and what's happening in AI. I think there are a lot of areas where crypto is or can be quite relevant. I wouldn't say it's something that we're seeing happening all over the place, but it's something that we'd love to encourage.
That's fascinating. And I think on the same note, since you talked about pivoting, I'm also curious, like, were there bets or like verticals, if you don't want to name specific companies, that you guys maybe had conviction on and over time was just proven wrong and didn't work out? And curious, like, what the lessons were from that? Because I'm sure, especially in the past year, there's a lot of experimentation that didn't quite work out.
I think that one thing we can definitely talk about, and I actually don't have a particular portfolio company in mind or even a company in mind at all, but I think a very obvious or very clear thing that early on people thought was that DAOs would require a kind of like an all-in-one system, right, to set them up. And we should create a company that allows for anyone to come and they have, everything is set up for them. It's this kind of almost like strangely, ironically monolithic approach to setting up these like liquid communities. And I think that those projects have evolved meaningfully themselves. I wouldn't say they've fully pivoted, but they've started to be much more kind of modular, right? And it's much more fluid, and folks can come and use aspects of them, etc. But that's something we've noticed, right? Actually, our first investment is a company called Guild.xyz, which is essentially tokenized access management. And they enable kind of their central thesis is this idea of liquid communities, right? Platformless communities that don't have to live or are not stuck into a particular platform or, we're using this provider to run our DAO, but really they live across the entire internet, right? And if you hold the token of the community, you have instant access with the right credentialing and the right level of access into the Telegram group and the Twitter and all the documents and the wiki and everything, right? Everywhere where this community lives. So we're starting to see a lot more of that kind of modular type of thinking.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Timour's comments there. So that was something that we kind of had in the thesis of Seeker Ventures from the get-go, to say, like, we really don't believe in this kind of notion of an all-in-one DAO set of tools where, someone's kind of pitching us on, this is the new G Suite for DAOs, and it's your Google Docs, it's your, like your software management, it's your payroll, it's your this, it's your that. We just never really believed in that. And that was echoed from the fact that our first investment was a project that was essentially predicated, its success was predicated on this future of DAO Legos and DAO tools being built and integrating with one another. We recently made 2 investments. I think they might have even been our last 2 investments in 2 projects. One was called Hats Protocol. The other one's Joke DAO. Both of them also are heavily kind of leaning on that thesis of DAO tools building on each other and thereby kind of facilitating the creation of DAOs that can kind of build their own, let's just say, tech stack of tools. So I can touch on each of them quickly. So Joke DAO, is a decision-making platform for DAOs. Users can create contests. So each contest will have a prompt. The prompt could be like, what should this protocol build next? Or who should be our next podcast guest, for example. and you can kind of airdrop tokens to your community members, and then they can vote on the eventual decision that's going to be done. The eventual decision can be done via an executable contract, so it could be kind of automatically made. You can set rewards at different kind of tiers to people who participated in the contest, people who won the contest. It can be completely customized. You can have retroactive metrics. You can build reputation into the people that had participated or not participated, and you can imagine a situation where if I'm constantly voicing a certain opinion in all of my contest votes, then possibly that would kind of profile me as a certain person. It kind of gets onto DAO identity, which is another set of kind of DAO composable tooling. But related to the other investment, HATS protocol, that's a primitive for DAOs to create roles within their DAOs via NFTs. And you could see a situation where, you could create a contest on Joke DAO saying like, who should next be promoted within our DAO to get like a new level of access. And within your DAO, you can have different access layers according to who holds what NFT. And let's just say you have a contest, I'm the winner of the contest, then I get, access to my the next level of Gnosis Safe, or I have different access via another project called Lit Protocol, which is like an access tooling platform for various on-chain activities.
And I think that's a great pivot to my last question, which I think will give something to take away for the DAO tooling founders or the DAO founders or any tinkerers in the DAO field, which is what have been the hallmarks of good DAO teams or DAO tooling teams? Because I see a lot of founders trying to do like Stripe before DAOs or Gusto before DAOs. That seems like the common approach. Has that been like a good heuristic to find like the next big things in DAO tooling, or do you guys have your own kind of unique frameworks you developed over time?
No, I think quite the opposite. Like the project that we've seen be most effective and efficient are the ones that believe something that no one else does. They are thinking about the world in a completely different way. They're not doing Carter for DAO or Rippling for DAOs or QuickBooks for DAOs or like whatever, Tinder for DAOs. I don't know. They're really thinking about the world in a slightly different way. And I think the thing that we're looking for within those teams and the founders are their ability to explain that. They should be able to actually explain what they believe in a unique and efficient and effective way in order to kind of capture the imagination of their users and also the actual kind of contributors to that DAO. And obviously within all these investments, like the team is massive. So I would say like they are definitely thinking about the world in a different way. They're not looking to replace kind of Web2 tools with Web3 tools, and they're often extremely Web3 native and creating new ways of collaborating.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, that last part of like the best DAO tooling founders are very DAO native. They've been part of at least a couple of DAOs in some kind of capacity, and they understand the challenges and potentially more importantly, the potential of these types of decentralized orgs, right? This touches on the point around the potential for emergence in the space, because I think, when folks first come in and they think, okay, cool, this technology easily allows for direct democracy, shared ownership, etc. What can I do with that? It's easy to start to map old ideas onto this new thing. And again, like you've both now said, think about kind of traditional tooling, but for decentralized orgs. I think that the true winners here and the true kind of interesting companies will be completely novel use cases that you can only really arrive at if you have the experience of participating in these communities.
Yeah, and I think that is actually a great segue back to my original point, which is the reason why I was excited to get involved is because you guys are DAO operators. You guys have been knee deep in DAOs, and you guys are the perfect people to kind of invest in this space. And you guys would do it much better than I possibly can. So I just entrust you guys to do it for me. And I'm really grateful to have been a part of the journey. And once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for people who want to follow you guys or keep up to date with what Seed Club is up to, what are the best channels for them to do this?
Yeah, so Seed Club Ventures is on Twitter at Seed Club VC, and I'm on Twitter at Timour XYZ.
And Timour has recently been working very hard to get up our website after 1 year of operating in somewhat of the shadows. So if you want to learn more about C Club Ventures, I think now is probably the right time to say you can hit us up on cclub.ventures, and you can follow me at Ant Avedissian on Twitter.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to include those in the show notes below. So thank you so much for coming on the show again, guys.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of the Blockcrunch podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite apps. And in case you didn't know, this interview is also available as a video on YouTube. And if you tag the Blockcrunch on Twitter this week and tell us what you liked about this episode, I'll be sure to respond to you as well. Now, if you'd like to go even deeper, we have a VIP tier where every week or so, we write an in-depth research brief or investment memo on a project. And we'll have exclusive AMAs with myself where I answer all your questions as well. Now, we already have analysts from some of the top funds and companies in crypto as subscribers. So if you're serious about getting an edge in crypto, head on over to theblockcrunch.com/VIP to learn more. And once again, thanks for supporting the show, and I'll see you next week.